They were on the field as much as anybody in the country. To be specific, the fourth most plays defended of anyone, 970 plays. And when you do that, and you're also number one in yards per play, it is crazy how good the Iowa defense has been in keeping this team in games and winning 10 two of the last 3 years. We will look at the defensive line, maybe not one of the more heralded groups in the country, but they typically come through, and we expect them to do well again this year. Welcome into Hawkeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. And of course, the guy that makes it all work for us, Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Hey, Corey.
Mark, I appreciate you being patient today. As our friend Hawkeye Howard in the chat brought up, it is my fault. So just running a little behind today. So appreciate everybody being patient. We got spring practice here right around the corner. I can officially say that. And March Madness is fully underway. The women's basketball tournament, conference tournament finished this past weekend. The Hawks winning a big one on CBS there. And then the men will try to create something spontaneous and special this week, and they need it. Did a segment this morning, a podcast that is up on my channel now, a bracketology show with Stadium's Tim Kruger, who's been doing it a long, long time. And he didn't think I was out of the conversation for a spot, a berth, but boy, they're probably 4 to 6 teams out right now, and they need a couple of wins, starting with Ohio State on Thursday.
Okay, so depending on what happens elsewhere, which of course is always the deal, if generally normal circumstances play out elsewhere, you think they need to win 2, maybe 3 this weekend?
I think based on my conversation with Tim and even my field prior to that, and of course Tim is, he's tracking every single team. This is what he's doing day and night now. I got the feel that if Iowa wins 2, I think they're probably in. I think if they win 1, it's more than likely that they're not in. I think he gave me percentages, and people can go on that video, and I kind of put them on the spot. Hey, give me a percentage chance that Iowa makes it if they win 1 game or 2 games or 3 games. So you can go back there and listen to what he said on that. But kind of my 2 cents, or my way of trying to reiterate what he said or relate what he said. If they win 1, my guess is they've got a 30 to 40% chance of getting in. That might be a little generous, maybe closer to 25%. If they win 2, I think that goes up to like 60%, 60, 65. But there's no guarantees. Like you said, there's a lot of other teams. There's a bunch of games, this week during championship week that will play a role, not just with the Big Ten tournament, but with some of these other conference brackets.
And does the Big Ten still start on Wednesday?
It does. The men don't play. Iowa got the single bye, so they'll play Thursday. But they do play Ohio State. And Ohio State, ever since they let go of Chris Holtman, they're actually playing really well. So, in a roundabout way, it's a good thing because, hey, if you lose to Ohio State, fine. You're not making the tournament. They ain't getting in without a win against Ohio State. If you beat Ohio State, it's not just like you're surviving. That's a good win because Ohio State's net is actually higher than we would have thought it'd be for the 10th seed here in the Big Ten tournament. So good win against Ohio State if they can get it, and then they get a rematch with Illinois. Illinois beat them twice. The old mantra that it's hard to beat a team 3 times. Maybe Iowa can steal one there. And if you get to Saturday, I think they're in a pretty good place. There's some weak resumes out there right now around the bubble.
And pardon me, because you weren't very specific, but I got from what you had to say about the women that they won the Big Ten tournament.
They did. I appreciate you making a point of.
I know that everyone watching knows that. I'm the only one that's in the dark about this. I did hear a score over the weekend that they beat Michigan. I heard that on the radio. I was driving, heard it on the radio.
Blew out Penn State and Michigan, and then just a heck of a contest against Nebraska. I read that it was what was the storyline that I read over the weekend regarding viewership? It was really good for CBS. 11 a.m. was the only problem. And we talked about this with football, how it's the new TV deals intersecting with the SEC. And, well, in this case, Sunday afternoon, you had the Missouri Valley Conference Arch Madness Championship between Drake and Indiana State. That was scheduled for 1. So you had basically a game go into the evening hours of Saturday and then an 11 a.m. Central Time start with the time change as well. So it's kind of disappointing. And my understanding is they're going to try to move that back into the afternoon hours next year. But a good effort by the Iowa women. They go 3-0 in 3 days and are poised for a 1 seed once their bracket comes out Sunday night.
Ari, thank you for your concern. I did not get robbed. And the helmets, I don't know if they will ever make a comeback. We will see. I don't know. Can't we just get away with this? Can't I just, if we deliver the best college football discussion, debate, analysis from coast to coast, blank wall, can't I just get away with that? All right. Before we get to the yes.
Well, just wanted to look, it is NFL free agency. And I should let you know, a couple Hawkeye, should let people know some Hawkeye news that just came in here within the last half hour. According to Adam Schefter of ESPN, former Hawkeye and Broncos linebacker, Josie Jewell is signing a $22.75 million deal with a $7 million signing bonus with the Carolina Panthers. So Josie makes the move to Carolina after a good stint in Denver. I think he dealt with injuries while he was there, but he's obviously proven to be a really solid NFL player. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And I did see that Geno Stone is, I believe, signing with the Bengals. So he moves from Baltimore, where he had a career year this past season, and now he'll be a Bengal.
Those Hawkeyes do well in the NFL generally. And we may have a few more that we will discuss here that you all want to produce on the field for the Hawkeyes in 2024. But beyond that, we shall see. Before we get to that, we'll look way, way down the road. The 2025 class now has 6 commits, including tight end. Yes, tight end, Eli Johnson. He caught 13 balls last year as a junior for 5 touchdowns, 168 yards. Your thoughts about Eli Johnson's potential?
He's not as highly touted or hyped up as some of the guys they brought in this year, like Michael Burt, certainly Gavin Hoffman, who's an early enrollee. I know people are excited about him, but he did have some good offers. He's a Midwest kid. He seems to do everything you want him to do on tape at this level. He blocks well. He's got another year of high school to develop some of his route running skills. I think that's typically the question mark. The last time they got a tight end out of Wisconsin, it's boded pretty well, right? With Addison Estringa, who is poised to be at least number 2 this year, assuming Luke Lachey stays healthy. And, some good programs are in on Eli. Michigan State, you see there on their offer list. Minnesota went after him. Iowa State, some schools that have some tight end history. Purdue was in on him, as was Missouri, Kansas. So good win. Iowa continuing to build the foundation pieces for these future classes. It seems like they typically start with quarterbacks. And for Iowa, they oftentimes start with tight ends. It's very rare that Iowa gets late cycle tight ends. They usually identify who they want early, and oftentimes they land those kids because who doesn't want to come to play as a tight end at Iowa? So they're not always the highest ranked kids, but this is another addition to that 25 class that is now 5. How many people do they have in that class, Mark? Do you have the 6 kids in that class now? So that class is coming around nicely, and we'll continue to get, hopefully, some, in the spring, we'll get more news on some commits. And, the only thing I can say about recruiting as you continue down into the latter years of the Kirk Ferentz era is it's going to get harder. Now, it's going to get easier from an offensive skill position standpoint if they show something on the field, but that's not going to happen until at least the fall. So if I'm opposing recruiters, I'm making a hard push to sell, especially to those offensive players. Hey, look at these crappy numbers this team puts out year after year. They don't send skill guys to the league, and their offense stinks. Now, maybe Tim Lester comes in there and changes the narrative, but that's what you're going to be up against from at least now until probably September, October. But in the meantime, Iowa can build the foundation pieces for these future classes with positions where they tend to excel, like tight end. And they got Jimmy Sullivan in 2025, so they got their quarterback.
Yes, out of the 6 commits, 1 4-star, the other 3 stars, and that is good for number 17. I know that's not a big concern, and nor should it be. in Iowa's situation, they have done very well with generally classes in the 30s, but number 17 right now, according to 247 Sports.
Is that 17th in the country or 17th in the Big Ten?
Well, 17th in the Big Ten may not be too bad, Brett Bielema, in the future.
You know, we got a guy on our, can I just say this? We have a guy on our, I don't know if Ryan's here, but he's one of our frequent callers into the men's men's and women's basketball post game shows. He's called into football shows as well, but he really, I don't want to say he doesn't like Brett Bielema, but he seems to have something against Brett. And I don't know. I think about Brett Bielema more in the offseason than I would like to. I have nothing against Brett Bielema, but it gets brought up a lot. What's his recruiting class looking like for 25?
He came to mind when you were, joking about Iowa possibly being near the bottom of the Big Ten, because his recruiting has not been good. I've not, I can look it up real quick here in terms of 2025, but his first couple of classes at Illinois, they have not been good in terms of numbers, in terms of the rankings.
Have they been any better than Love?
I think they're generally the same. I'd have to go back to be more specific.
I know, the narrative with Illinois has long been, how are they going to get kids to want to come down from Chicago down to Champaign? I understand that to a point. Now, I don't know that Chicago is quite the recruiting bed that it used to be. But it's still solid. a lot of good prospects up there. And, teams like Iowa, I mean, there's going to be a lot, obviously you're going to be dealing with a lot of programs. There's totally different recruiting methodology as it relates to trying to recruit these big metropolitan areas as opposed to the small town kids of Iowa. So it's funny, I was talking to Tim Kruger of Stadium this morning, and he was talking about Porter Moser, head basketball coach at Oklahoma. There's rumors that he's going to take the job at DePaul, which seems odd. Why you would jump from Oklahoma to DePaul? That's, they've been bottom feeders in the Big East for years now, but sounds like he doesn't like it in Norman. And, you kind of look at a program like DePaul and say, okay, maybe a little bit of a sleeping giant to some extent, given the recruiting landscape. And, I think Porter spent a lot of time in the area. He was at Loyola prior to getting the job in Norman. So anyways, I'm a little surprised Brett hasn't done better. I know, we're such a portal centric sport now that you got to weigh all of it. Right. But, and speaking of portal, I don't want to jump the gun. I know you want to talk about defensive linemen for Iowa, but, Iowa did lose this one guy that, as I was kind of prepping for this discussion, this one guy that I didn't really account for is Ontario Thompson, who was probably the one guy in this past transfer portal class that surprised me when he left. Like the rest of the guys you can kind of explain. I still don't quite get the decision from Ontario. He transfers to Western Michigan. I thought he would have played this year with, departures of guys like Logan Lee and Noah Shannon. We talked about Lee the other day because he tested out really well at the NFL Combine. So it's not hard to imagine why Thompson was stuck behind a guy like that. Now, Y.A. Black is back for an extra year, but still, Y.A. Black, Aaron Graves, we'll talk about the rest of the pieces up front, but it's interesting, the guys that choose to leave the program, and they're in a pretty good spot. I think development, of course, along the edge is going to be key. I didn't think Deontay Craig had the best of years last year. We saw kind of an emergence from some younger, unheralded guys like Max Llewellyn, Ethan Herkett. Joe Evans is gone, so you're probably going to see someone like Brian Allen Jr. get an opportunity to maybe emerge. Maybe you get a walk-on in there. I mean, we've had a number of them over the years that, especially these smaller guys, that they're hard-nosed, they're fundamental. We hear the same thing, so many different positions with Iowa football, but they end up emerging. But I would not be surprised to see one of the younger guys that has not seen the field break through this spring, because they've got some really athletic kids like Kenneth Merriweather, who played a lot of receiver in high school. He was part of the 23 class. You got a kid from Texas, from Plano, that is coming up this year, not enrolling early, but he's kind of a freak, really raw talent. So how much can you get these kids? How fast can you get these kids up to speed? That's the one disappointing thing for me with Ontario, is he was raw. He's a a 300-pound dude that could run like a 4.6. You know, he's what you want as far as an athletic interior guy. So, but that's also college football. You move on and you take a different approach to things. Every year's a different year.
Briefly to camp off Brett Bielema, if nothing else, he's consistent. Number 54 in rankings the last 2 years, and number 63 his first class. There was we had this conversation on the Miami channel the other night because there was a back and forth between Brett Bielema and Mario Cristobal on Twitter X. There are 2 5-stars in the Chicago area. Speaking of which, 2 5-stars, they both went to Miami, and Brett Bielema really didn't come out and say anything specific, but he gave one of those kind of wide eyeball looks, one of those emojis on Twitter. There was a lot of speculation as to what that meant, and there was a bit of a snide remark maybe about throwing them too much money, or I don't know what that means anymore. But he was certainly. But the thing is and the conversation we had was that Brett Bielema and Illinois weren't getting these players anyway. Their second choice was Ohio State, so he's not getting those guys anyway. So you can be upset about losing 2 5-stars in your backyard, but when they're not going to come your way anyway, then it's a tough deal there at Illinois. So we'll see. I've got a lot of respect for him. Think he does a really good job, but it will be difficult there.
I was just going to let everybody know. Let me pull this up here. So, did you see the there's a lot of quotes coming down from Saban's camp. I mean, this is just ongoing. I noticed On3 published a quote from him today. All the things that I believed in for all these years, 50 years of coaching, no longer exist in college athletics.
So I have no issue with part of his gripe, because I think it's the same angst that most college football fans feel about, we don't like the player movement, we don't like the look, regardless of how much substance there is to it, but the look that the players are just going to the highest bidder. And now with the NCAA's lack of control and their powerless situation in the courts in Tennessee and Virginia, federal courts ruling that the NCAA cannot touch any of this. And now that inducements have been, I don't want to say that they're legalized. They already were, in a sense. They were legislated against by the NCAA, but that was an illegal move of sorts, that to be able to say that can't be part of the process. So when Nick Saban came out last week and talked about the 2 big statements he made last week that I saw, were that, number one, he didn't like the thought that after they lost the Rose Bowl, that what he was hearing back from his players were basically 2 questions. Number one, can you guarantee that I'm going to start next year? Which, of course, the culture in any great football program is you earn your job. And number 2 was, how much money am I going to make? And that really turned him off. And I get that. I totally get that. But then I saw something from him today. And the only reason I saw it was posted by somebody I follow on Twitter, from our guy James Coleman. If I could find it here. This I thought was hypocritical. So he states, so Nick Saban says, quote, "You're going to create a caste system where the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. And eventually the fans will look at it like, I really don't want to watch the game." Well, I responded, well, the caste system has always existed. The fans just don't want to watch college kids who make more money than they do. And coaches don't want the hassle and the headache of dealing with player economic leverage and the freedom of movement. But this caste system, that has occurred since day one, practically, or at least since the 50s or 60s in college football.
You think it's almost I'm not trying to, I think everything Nick Saban says has merit, but do you almost feel like that there's a little bit of frustration that he can't rule the system the way he wants to rule it and the way he ruled it successfully for so long? Like
Yes.
there was a caste system, but it bent to his favor for so long. And so be it. Like he played the system the way he played the system the way he knew how to play the system. And now he found it to be not quite as easy for him to run the system the way he wants to run it. Right. I don't know that it's necessarily a structure problem as much as it's just a different problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's lost control. And no, and he hasn't lost it to anyone in particular. Nobody has control. He can't control his roster like he once did, and nobody can. So that's got to be frustrating. And I realize at his age, and that I'm not going to make a big deal of that, but I think it's generally understood or known that the older you get, the more you don't like change. The big change that he was able to grasp and take advantage of, even though he didn't like it, was the transition on the field from more of a running game defense to spread them out, throw it down the field. And he came out and said, I don't like this style of football. I don't like it, but it was football and it was something he could control. So he just changed his personnel, changed his roster philosophy, coaches he hired. He adjusted, kept rolling. But this is different.
By the way, I know you're going to love this, Mark.
Can't wait.
We just got some breaking news on Iowa women's basketball. So
they've canceled the NCAA women's tournament.
No. The Hawkeyes, big news. Hawkeyes just landed 2025 5-star guard Addison Deal out of California. She's considered by ESPN to be a top 12 prospect in the country. So as far as recruiting is concerned, that's pretty big for that program. And she'll join another 5-star, Journey Houston, who's out of the Quad Cities, who's already committed to that class. So taking advantage of that, Caitlin Clark, the oohs and the ahs from that era that we've witnessed.
And it's amazing because it appears as though she is the sole reason. I don't want to say 100%. I know it's a team game and she needs other players. I'm not talking about the results on the court, but I'm talking about the phenomena, the euphoria, the hype surrounding the program, because I kind of liken it to UConn women's basketball of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that it seemed like every 5-star in the country wanted to go play for UConn. And I was 30 minutes away from campus thinking, why would anyone want to come here?
Yeah. Well, it's just, you could argue, I mean, from an outsider's perspective, why would anyone want to come to Iowa? There's that narrative out there. And I guess I didn't even think about the fact that you were around an area that really loved women's basketball because of that UConn program and Gino and all. I mean, just the dominance that the Huskies.
Yeah. And when I showed up, I was into men's basketball, and I talked to a few neighbors, and they brought up UConn. I just assumed they were talking about the men, and I started talking to them, and they weren't talking about the men. They were talking about the women. They were talking about how they plan their day, and on Saturday they play it. And I'm like, what is going on here? Who are these people? Did I just run into two of the? No, it wasn't. I kept running into them.
Yeah, the UConn men are back looking pretty good right now. How about David's comment in the chat? It's a beautiful comment.
Absolutely, we can do that. I covered a ton of women's college basketball for about 6 or 7 years.
The voice of what if I renamed myself the voice of women's basketball? There you go. Remember we talked for a while about who the voice of college basketball was, Mark? What about specifically the voice of women's basketball?
Who is the voice of college basketball? We talked about that?
We talked about that like 2 years ago.
Well, you are the preeminent Iowa athletics, whatever you want to call yourself, host, commentator, podcaster.
Okay.
You're going to branch that off into women's college basketball.
Well, no, I'm not. But
I'm
I,
not saying you
I,
shouldn't.
yeah.
I
Well,
think you got your hands full, and if you can be Mr. Hawkeye, then
Mr. Hawkeye.
I didn't mean it
I-
in that sense that
But no, you know what I'm thinking, Mark, and I mean this
yeah.
seriously. You and I have had conversations off the air. As I am very curious because we all know, like, the level of popularity right now with Iowa women's basketball is at an all-time high, and that's what people are. I mean, they'd much rather watch Iowa women's basketball content on my channel than Iowa men's basketball content right now. That's just how it is. Now, you wonder when Caitlin Clark leaves, it's going to take a hit. Not just on my channel, but just in general. Like, it's going to take a hit. The popularity of the sport, that's natural, but it's not going to go back to where it was. Like, it has obviously done something for the sport, something significant. So I'm curious as to where it is once she leaves, because I mean the team is going to be so different without her. I still got a chance to be pretty good, but I mean, I don't know. It'll be an interesting storyline.
The first thing that comes to mind that I liken it to would be Tiger Woods. And when Tiger Woods left golf, or not that he's completely left, but we know when he started to have injuries and he wasn't the player that he was before, that I think golf was, I'm taking a shot here. I've not looked into it, but in a much better position from a popularity standpoint than it was when he started. But then I'm sure it's rescinded since then, and it's not where it was 20 years ago
And it's a
with
little
him.
different because he represented himself. Caitlin Clark represents a program that's going to, be around. But yeah, I get the illustration, and I feel the same way. I have a hard time. I have a hard time being into golf. I mean, like, I love golf. I just golfed yesterday for the first time this season, but I have a hard time wanting to sit down and watch golf unless Tiger's playing.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just how I am. So
Because you probably started watching sports when he was on top. You probably didn't watch golf before Tiger Woods, but you may not even have been at the age that you could.
right. But
Yeah.
I didn't watch Tiger Woods from a young age. Like when he was dominating the tour in the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, I wasn't watching all of that. The first moment that I really remember watching was actually later in his dominance in 2008 when he came back against Rocco Mediate and forced a playoff at the U.S. Open, and just the roar of the crowd in that moment. I remember watching that, and anyways, long story short,
I actually really liked golf and watched golf before Tiger Woods. And during the Tiger Woods era, I watched very little and continue to watch now nothing. I watched more Tiger Woods era golf than I do now because I watch zero. Have we done everything with this defensive front that we can? Did I take all these notes for nothing? So
no,
Logan Lee, you talked about what a phenom he was at the NFL Combine, like a top 15% performer athletically since 1987. So he's gone. I was a bit surprised, but stats and college productivity don't always align with pro potential. But for as good as Joe Evans has been, 13 and a half tackles for loss last year, 9.5 sacks, has either led or tied the Hawkeyes in sacks for 4 consecutive years that he was not invited to the combine. And I'm sure he's going to get a look, of course. He's earned that. But those two guys are gone, and both were captains. So that obviously speaks to not just their on field play, but their leadership.
I mean, do you want to just? I don't know. I mean, yeah, the draft's going to be something to follow. Do you want to just lay out a 2 deep? That's kind of what I wanted to just, given this position and the fact that there's certainly diversity in player type along that defensive line. Let's just lay out from left to right or defensive line. So first of all, your 2 edge guys, likely barring something unforeseen as it relates to injuries, are going to be Deontay Craig at one side. And then at the other side, go down the list and you're like, okay, well, Max Llewellyn has played a lot. Ethan Hurkett's played a lot. Brian Allen's a guy who flashed early in the year, but I think that's the one position where you're like, okay, somebody might be able to break through that we're not talking about. And Iowa's going to rotate guys regardless of who's the starter is. Remember, a guy named what's his face? Yeah, that's his name. What's his face? Lucas Van Ness, who went to Green Bay, didn't even start at Iowa. That was the narrative with him, and then he gets drafted in the first round. So, like, starting isn't everything. Number of snaps is probably more important, but I'll be interested to see where that other position lines up. As it relates to the interior guys, clearly you've got Y.A. Black at one spot, Aaron Graves at the other, two really big physical bodies. Both those guys have an opportunity at being NFL type guys. It's long been thought that Y.A. Black has untapped potential, and he has flashed. He has also dealt with some injuries, and injuries are part of football. I get that, but maybe one more year, maybe he really comes through this spring and emerges and ends up being one of the premier defensive linemen in this league. I think that he's got the potential to do that, and Aaron Graves has the potential to do that. They could have potentially, again, keyword potentially, they could have the best defensive interior of any team in this conference. I mean, that's how I think how good Y.A. Black and Aaron Graves are from an athleticism, physical standpoint. And I thought Deontay Craig, again, I said this earlier, I thought he kind of underperformed at times last year. He didn't really, I think he was solid. We didn't notice anything horribly inconsistent about his play, but I don't know how many. Do you have his number of? Do you have Deontay Craig's number of tackles / tackles for loss and sacks, Mark?
Yes. So he had 50.
See, that's even a little bit more than I would have thought. But at the same time, 3 sacks. Given what we saw his first year, you think, okay, maybe that kid can, be at least a 6 or 7 sack guy. So. But again, I know the game's more complex. This is a team unit, the way they play. They don't often bring more than 4 guys. I mean, they do at times. They're going to bring extra pressure, but that does put more pressure on those guys up front. I mean, honestly, I as of right now, if I had to guess, I'd probably go Max Llewellyn as the other defensive end, and then again, him and Herkett kind of rotate, or maybe Herkett even rotates with Deontay Craig. And then, so you've got 5 guys that I would say right there that you're like really comfortable with, that have proven themselves and are, you're extremely comfortable with. Now, they need more than 5. Okay. So Kelvin Bell, Phil Parker, they typically like to rotate at least 7 to 8 guys. And this is the first year in a while where I'm not so sure who guys 6, 7, 8 are. Last year, we came into the season saying this might be as deep as they've been at this position in several years. And I look back and say, yeah, that was probably the case, even though Noah Shannon ended up sitting out the year for a ridiculous reason. Nevertheless, I just don't know who you go with. I mentioned Chima Chineke, the kid from Plano. Jack Campbell's younger brother, Drew, is coming in. He's recruited as kind of an edge rusher. I don't know if his future's there at linebacker. He's listed at, I think, 6'4", 6'5", 225 coming into college. So how fast has he progressed? Devon Kennedy's another one. Really physical guy from Phoenix. Iowa doesn't typically do a lot of work in Arizona. Got him up to Iowa. He's a little raw. Mentioned Kenneth Merriweather. Maddox Borcherding Johnson is a guy who will be a year older. Joseph Anderson's another one that's coming in during this class, another raw guy out of St. Louis. So just a lot. I think that would be how I'd describe this group. Like, top 5 are so clear. And then after that, you've got a lot of unproven, but also a lot of raw talent. So how that all plays out, we'll have to see. I'll be watching to see. One guy that I think you probably peg and say this probably would be the guy if things continue to play out would be Brian Allen Jr., because I thought he might get some play based on what we saw in the spring last year. Thought he might get some play as the season went on, but they were just too deep.
So here's a few notes to play off what you just ran down. One being, again, the number of snaps once you subtract Logan Lee and Joe Evans, really lends to what you're talking about in regards to being comfortable with these guys. The top 4 returning players logged 1,070 snaps. So 2 of them were around the 150 range. The other 2 were, somewhere in the 450 snap range. So they were roughly playing half the time. And then the 2 other tidbits that came up as I was reviewing things over and over was exactly what you hit right there at the end, that if there's an unproven guy that seems to be the most likely to make an impact, it would be Brian Allen. And that, are you concerned that they don't have the guys available to get the edge rush that they need?
I mean, I was concerned I was concerned equally about that last year, even though they were really deep. I mean, Joe, I love Joe Evans, great player, but he's a former quarterback. He's an Ames kid that was undersized, and he just worked his tail off. They lost more on the interior with Shannon and Logan Lee. So, yeah, I guess. But, I mean, I have more faith and confidence in Herkin and Llewellyn now, and you hope Craig can take that step forward. I saw James in the chat brought up Jeff Bowie. That's another kid who's just dealt with a plethora of injuries. I think he broke his arm last year. I remember seeing him in one of the practices leading up to the fall season where he was in a cast or a sling. So he's just another guy that's on scholarship. You'd love to get him healthy. Maybe he can break through. One guy I didn't mention that we probably should, Mark, who has played, is Jeremiah Pittman. He's listed at 6'3", 290. I thought, I don't know this, but I want to be careful not to be disrespectful to anybody. I thought he looked a little overweight last year at times when I saw him on the field, but he did get some snaps. I don't know if you have the number of snaps that he played, and I'm showing he played in 10 different games. So he would probably he'd have to be on that 2 line, right? Behind Black and Graves. I would think he's going to be on that 2 line. And then after that, I think it's probably more of a hunt.
Yeah, I don't have anything on him, although in listing backups here on The Athletic, just to give them their due. So that's where I'm pulling these, the depth chart from. They have him listed extremely high at 6'3", 290 in regards to what they consider to be the primary backups.
Yeah. So I guess you could argue 5, maybe 6 are solidified, but I don't know that Jeremiah Pittman showed me enough to where I have a ton of confidence. I mean, a few guys we didn't mention, Griffin Little, Chase Brackney, a second-year kid out of Colorado, same high school as Alex Padilla, Caden Crawford, former, I believe Caden, was he at one time committed to Kansas State? I know Kansas State offered him. He's out of the Lansing, Kansas area. And am I missing somebody else? Maybe not. I mentioned Meriwether and the 3 guys coming in, 3-4 guys they have coming in this year.
Good stuff, folks. Appreciate you being here as always here on the Voice of College Football. This is our Hawkeye show that we deliver each and every Tuesday, courtesy Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. 137 consecutive weeks. Bring a friend or 2 or 50 or more. That's allowed as well. Next Tuesday, 4:30 Central Time. Before we wrap it up on that, Kelvin Bell, he doesn't, not that I'm listening to defensive line coach talk across the country on a regular basis, but he's not necessarily a guy that seems to be getting his due.
That's interesting. Maybe there's some truth to that. I mean, I know one thing that he's done that I really appreciate is the emphasis on depth. I remember toward the later years of Norm Parker, and even I think a couple of those early Phil coordinated years, that defensive line, the one knock against it was maybe a lack of depth. And I always point to this. I know people probably get tired of hearing it, but I just remember those games, late 2000s, early 2010s, where you had these, the Dan Purses and the Kafkas of Northwestern that would kind of wear you out and stress that defensive line. We don't really have that issue now because one, it seems like not only do they have more depth, but they also have guys that are just have better motors. Like they just recruit with more of a view to, does a guy have a motor that we can work with? And, you know, I mean, you talk about Jeremiah Pittman, big kid. He got a motor. If you watch him, the kid's got a motor. Herkett, Llewellyn, Joe Evans, they all got motors. The guys that I talked about in the 24 class, I mean, they're all physically gifted. They got motors, and so those two things, I think he's been a big part of that, and he has turned out some good pro prospects. One being Lucas Van Ness, who was not real highly recruited coming out of high school. I'm trying to think of who else has come under his leadership. I think he was there during the AJ Epinesa era, which I don't, he was obviously well thought of coming out of high school. But no, he's done a real good job with that class. I think the next step for him is, can you find like you said earlier, a well-defined pass rusher? And can you get that type of production? And I'm talking like, it's hard to do, but can you get Drew Ott 2015 like production, or Adrian Claiborne 2008 type production? Those are the ones that I think maybe they're still missing, and those are, again, hard to come by. I mean, Adrian Claiborne put together a pretty nice career in the league, and I'm sure Lucas Van Ness is on his way, but they've had good players. Davion Nixon is another one I didn't mention that came through the leadership of Kelvin Bell. So I don't know. Maybe they're another year away. Maybe Deontay Craig turns into that guy. I don't know that Herkett or Llewellyn or either one of those guys are poised to become some future phenom at the NFL level, but it's also been proven that Joe Evans and guys like that can be molded by Kelvin and by Phil and turn into really solid Big Ten defensive linemen.
You hit on the guy that I believe is my favorite Iowa defensive lineman of all time, and that's AJ Epinesa.
Yeah, absolutely. And see, where did he?
I like guys that bat passes in the air.
Well, Anthony, that was that 2017 line, for example, was a very good line. Remember, Anthony Nelson was on that roster.
Yeah.
He ended up heading over to the Bucs, and I don't know what his status is right now, but played a lot. And Matt Nelson was also on the defensive line, who's become a starting offensive tackle in the league. So very interesting 2017 defensive line. Who was I just thinking of? Was there someone else that we were about to bring up? I don't know. But yeah, they've had some unheralded, underrated guys. Parker Hesse, who's turned into a tight end.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's another name. We can keep going down the list.
Yeah. And bringing up those guys, and especially Drew Ott and Adrian Claiborne, reminds me, maybe we will allow you to get through the March Madness and the all the hysteria concerning college basketball. But what I would love to do sometime, maybe we do it on the regular show, but maybe we carve out an hour at some other point during downtime in May and June, an Iowa Mount Rushmore discussion.
For each position?
Iowa football, Mount Rushmore. No, just the Mount Rushmore.
Okay.
Just the four.
All time or in my lifetime?
We can start to divide it. If you want to go those various routes, if you want to divide by positions and so forth, but we should land on a final four.
Okay. I think the best way to do that, Mark, would be to devote a show to creating a Mount Rushmore for each position.
Okay.
And then you take one from each position, and then you have one player from each position, and then the final round would be who are the best overall players of all these different positions.
Folks, what do you think? We will do a Mount Rushmore and sometime in May or June, maybe after spring ball. I'm looking forward to that. All right, Corey, thank you so much for being here, making this happen as always, despite a busy Tuesday. What's going on there from the Hawkeye of the Storm? Of course, it is Big Ten tournament week.
Big Ten tournament week. Like I said earlier, we did release the show with Tim Kruger, great guy, covers Creighton basketball and also does bracketology for Stadium. So that bracketology show is up on the channel. And then I probably won't get anything out until late tonight, but Addison Deal just committed. So 5-star news for Iowa women's basketball. And of course, boy, tomorrow's already Wednesday. So you got the start of the Big Ten tournament tomorrow. Men play Thursday, and then hopefully Friday, and then hopefully Saturday. Regardless, Iowa will be playing in postseason. Let's just hope it's not the NIT. I hate the NIT, Mark. I hate it with a passion. Everything about it just sucks.
Yeah, just the whole idea of we're playing this tournament, and if we win it, then what do we get to brag about? What is our claim?
Like, from a coaching perspective, it's kind of like coaching in like the Little Caesars Pizza Bowl, because like you're getting extra practices and your team's going to get better for next season. But it's also like, man, I'm almost embarrassed if I have to do content. I mean, I'll gladly do. People will listen because Iowa basketball fans are the best, and I will gladly watch. But to go out there doing recaps of Iowa versus, St. Francis, PA in the NIT is just going to be a little bit depressing. So hopes are not all the way buried. Let's just hope they don't Remember, they lost to Ohio State a year ago in the Big Ten tournament. Let's just hope they don't do that again. Ohio State's playing good right now. Playing good basketball right now.
Hummus Hero, we will put this on the back burner. We will save this. We've got plenty of time to address this. Caleb Brown, number 1 receiver, we will discuss in future.
We gotta break down receivers maybe next week. We go back to offense for a week because we haven't broken down that position. It's a important one.
Sounds good. Everyone lock it in with Corey for the rest of the week, the rest of March, in fact, of course, with Iowa men's and women's basketball, football, spring camp starting here very soon. And of course, make it on back here at the Voice of College Football for our Hawkeye show with Corey each and every Tuesday at 4:30 Central. And in 1/2 hour, we talk Nebraska football with Justin Adams over on the Husker channel. So please join us there. Regardless of whether you love the Huskers, hate the Huskers, we would love to have you. See you at 7 Eastern, 6 Central